Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Pelicans Daily, brought to you by Fan Arch. I'm your host, David Grubb, editor in chief of thebirdwrites.com. Well, from all indication, it looks like Joe Dumars will be the next head of basketball operations for the New Orleans Pelicans. All reports seem to indicate that it's just a deal waiting to be finalized and that he will take over for David Griffin after 6 seasons. Dumars, of course, was the man in charge for the Detroit Pistons from 2000 to 2014. During that time, the Pistons made the playoffs several times, made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times, and made two NBA Finals appearances and won one World Championship back in 2004 in that notable series, beating the Los Angeles Lakers in 5 games. Um, there are good things about Joe Dumars, and there are bad things about Joe Dumars. On the positive side, certainly the reasons to be encouraged is that Joe has one thing that you want the next executive to have, and that's a good relationship with ownership. But we will talk about them in a moment. The other part is that he's certainly respected in the offices of the NBA. Having worked there the last couple of years and working around the league and in the league as a player since the 80s. So you're talking about someone with, almost 40 years of experience in professional basketball. That's a good thing. Um, Dumars as a person is a very high character individual, someone that people, a guy who's going to speak to you directly, and I think that's a contrast to what the impression was about David Griffin, that you didn't always get a straight answer, that you felt sometimes like you were being snowed. Well, there's no expectation of that with Joe Dumars. Um, I think if you're talking about things like discipline, certainly that's his role with the NBA. So if you thought that the Pelicans have been an undisciplined team, Joe Dumars should impact that based on his own beliefs and principles as a leader. The second half, though, of his career with the Pistons was pretty bad. Um, in his final 7 seasons, uh, 6, 7 seasons, the Pistons went from contender to bottoming out. Uh, they didn't win more than 39 games in any of his last 6 seasons. They didn't win 30 games in 4 of those 6 seasons. His draft record is spotty at best. Um, I think the best player he drafted in his tenure would likely be Andre Drummond. So this is a guy who, if you're thinking about talent assessment, if you're thinking about sustaining something, it's hard to see where that works in applying to Joe Dumars. If you talk about putting stability as far as the top of the franchise, okay, we'll give you that. Um, it seems that that he's going to keep Bryson Graham, the general manager of the Pelicans. Bryson had been the guy who had been tabbed with, leading the evaluation of the drafting for this team. The Pelicans have drafted very well the last few seasons outside of the Jordan Hawkins draft pick. But you're talking about a team that drafted a good rookie class this season. You take Jordan Hawkins out of the mix, and then you go back to the Trey Murphy, Jose Alvarado, Herb Jones, those types of guys, Najee Marshall, being able to find guys on the fringes of the league. Typically the Pelicans have done a decent job the last few seasons of uh, picking talent. Uh, they have not gotten enough out of their top end talent. They have not traded well, but as far as the draft goes, they've been considering their draft position. They've done a decent job. Uh, the other concerns would be that I'm not concerned as much when people talk about the game passing you by. The game doesn't pass you by. When you look around the league, you say, you can look at the numbers and you can evaluate those things, and you have people around you who can help you understand those things. But if you're not making the right moves, if you are not drafting the right players, if you are not taking this organization to the next level, and I think that's going to be the most important thing, then Joe Dumars is doomed to failure. And I think that you have to look at it as, you know, the guy himself, um, and we'll talk about the process in a moment. The process is a problem, but we're talking about the guy itself. I don't know yet if it's a bad hire. It is an uninspired hire. It is a quick hire. It is a sudden hire. I can't say yet, and I'm not going to evaluate um, a person's performance before they've had any, put anything on the table uh, to say if it's a good or a bad hire just yet. Um, but Joe Dumars' track record at the end of his Pistons tenure is just not good, whether it came with coaching hires, whether it came with player assessments, or just trying to build it. It didn't work. His last executive experience with a team was with the Sacramento Kings, where he really didn't make any major decisions as far as the development of that team. I think that what he's going to have to do, the biggest mandate that he has, for me, not ownership, and again, we will talk about ownership in just a moment. The biggest mandate that he has, from my perspective, is to continue to bolster the Pelicans' operations, their basketball operations, enhancing the scouting staff, forcing ownership to open up the purse and spend money on things like the practice facility, spend money on the arena themselves, and not just wait for the state to subsidize any renovations. Because look, we know the financial circumstances here in the state of Louisiana. There's no state money available right now. Not when we're looking at teachers losing money, not when we're looking at these giant budget deficits coming from the federal government. There's no state money coming to save the New Orleans arena anytime soon, at least not a giant influx of cash. So they're going to have to figure out some way for an arena that has its lease coming up with the Pelicans in, I believe, 2029. This is going to get close very soon. And there's no plan yet on how to renovate that arena, generally considered the worst in the NBA. Joe Dumars has to take what David Griffin did on the business operations another step further, if not two steps further, because the perception of the New Orleans Pelicans by fans, by media, and by a lot of people around the NBA is that this is an organization that's just trying to float along and exist in a place where they aren't really bad, but they're never really good because they will never spend the money or allocate the resources to go all in for anything. Remember, 23 seasons and this team has never paid the luxury tax. That's not just an accident. That is by design, whether it was penny pinching done by George Shinn or by Tom and now Gail Benson and the rest of that leadership group, which includes Dennis Lauscha and Mickey Loomis, and those folks. So I think that if anything, if Joe Dumars is going to do anything well, then he's going to have to come in and try to force this team to open up the pocketbook, spend some money, and improve the organization that way. And even on the core product, they're going to have to at some point take on some contracts and make a swing. Because mediocrity, the fan base here is turning quickly, and mediocrity is not, going to do it. If you're going to settle for being a team that just makes the play-in or wins a playoff series, as the team has only done twice in franchise history, then quite frankly, basketball is going to be doomed in New Orleans sooner rather than later. Now, uh, the biggest problems that I have with the Joe Dumars signing, and I think the biggest problem that most people have, is that the process is incredibly flawed. Look, we talked a bit about this yesterday. It's like, this is clearly something that the New Orleans Pelicans were working on prior to firing David Griffin. Less than 24 hours after the announcement comes out on Monday, and by Monday afternoon, we're hearing that Dumars could possibly be getting the job. By Tuesday, it's almost a certainty, and here Wednesday, we're talking about the deal is done. No other candidates mentioned, no other interviews held. And I think that that's a huge problem for the New Orleans Pelicans, because what it says is that they had no intention of finding the best person. What they found is a person they had a good relationship with. And I don't know if Joe is or is not the best person, but here's what I do know. that in the job application process, you may have a candidate that you're really into, that you think is the best candidate, but you finish the interviews. You go through the interview process. That's why when you go to an interview, they say you'll hear back from us soon because they want to see the other candidates. Because either it's a confirmation that the guy that you're really interested in is the one to take, or you may be exposed to somebody who could do the job better. Somebody could come in and just, blow you away by having a great idea or a great plan for your organization. But it's clear that the vision for this organization is not for the head of basketball operations. The vision for the organization is not about basketball. The vision for the New Orleans Pelicans, it appears, is simply to be an extension of the Benson business empire, to make them money. And to hear people like Shamit Dua, who I trust, who I sit next to at most games, if you read his Substack or you check out his social media, when he says that, part of the reason that they do things like this is simply because they're holding out to get money. When the NBA does its next round of expansion, and you're talking about a $300 million windfall or more, in expansion fees that will be distributed across the league, that this ownership group is in it for the cash, and that they're going to just continue to do the bare minimum in order to make the money they had. And this feels like very much like the Los Angeles Clippers from 19 whatever up until the 2000s, when they were under the ownership of Donald Sterling, who figured out that the way to be most profitable was just be bad. Not really, really bad. The Clippers were really, really bad at times, but they were a team that, they were in LA, so they knew that they had a fan base and they could just, you had celebrity names. You had occasionally had big name players that came through, and occasionally they would make the playoffs. Not winning series, but they could get bounced in round one, get people excited that maybe they had potential, and they'd ship those guys out, start the process all over again. Get a high draft pick, get folks excited, bring in a couple veterans, make a quick run, make a quick exit, rinse and repeat. And it feels like that's the ride that the Pelicans are on right now. That mediocrity is okay with them as long as they don't get embarrassed. But this is embarrassing. This is frustrating. And fans are not happy with the product and they're not happy with the process. And they have every right to be upset with the management of this team. Because as much of the disdain that had occurred around the league. Remember when people would talk about that, there needed to be a separation of the organizations, and we thought that was going to happen when David Griffin arrived. There's been no separation. Mickey Loomis still has an outsized influence on Gail Benson. Dennis Lauscher still has outsized influence on Gail Benson, who is not particularly interested in the running of a basketball team. She said it herself. She doesn't find it particularly fun to go to games. She'd rather be with the horses. So when you look at this team and you look at what they're doing for the future, you have to wonder, what is the plan? Do they really want to be a top of the line organization? Do they really want to win an NBA championship as much as they can put it in a press release? Does that really occur? Because it doesn't matter what the basketball people want to do. It doesn't matter if Joe Dumars comes in and wants to win a championship. It doesn't matter whom the next head coach is. It doesn't matter what players you bring in. If at the top, if fundamentally there's no agreement that we are all in trying to build a number one organization to get championship results and to get elite players in the city of New Orleans, then it'll never happen. It'll never happen. And even if Joe Dumars does his best and is the right person for the job, there will still be a disconnect at the highest levels of the organization. Because when push comes to shove and the time comes to put the money on the table to make a run, a real run, they won't do it. They won't bring that player in. They won't pay that bill. And as long as that's the case, the New Orleans Pelicans are going to be a mediocre franchise. The next question for the Pels, of course, is the fate of Willie Green. And there are conflicting reports. I get an email And it tells me that Willie Green is the odds on favorite to be the next coach to be fired. At the same time, there are reports that there's an edict for Dumars to keep Willie Green. And then there are also reports that the Phoenix Suns are interested in making Green their next head coach. I think if you're a Pelicans fan and you want Willie Green to be gone, you better cross your fingers that the Phoenix Suns do reach out to him and provide some level of compensation to the New Orleans Pelicans and take him off their hands. Otherwise, it looks like Willie will be back. And I think that that's a tough position for him to be put in because clearly there wasn't a revolt in the locker room this season, but this team quit on Willie Green. At least the guys who matter did. Sure, the young guys who are just hearing all this stuff, the young guys who are fighting for minutes in their NBA careers, they don't have the ability to quit on anybody. But the guys who have been here a while, the veterans who've been around the league, they quit on Willie Green. You don't lose as badly as the Pelicans lose over and over again. 4 40-point losses, several 20-point losses, long losing streaks. The Pelicans put together longer losing streaks than the Wizards. The Pelicans put together longer losing streaks than the Jazz, two teams that finished with worse records than them. But the Pelicans are the ones that, Willie also set the franchise road losing streak this past season. He has a losing record against the Eastern Conference over 4 seasons. The Pelicans have only had a 5-game winning streak 3 times in 4 years under Willie Green, and yet he'll probably be the head coach next season. Again, there are some good things that Willie Green is able to do. But on a strategy basis on a night to night, his rotations there are questionable. And there are other parts of just being a young coach that we'll never know that just haven't worked. And in the NBA, and I've said this before, it shows that the windows for championships are basically 4 years. Even if you go look at Dumars, took over in 2000, 2001, won his championship in 2004. That was his 4th season. Never won a championship again. What does that tell you? That's essentially the frame. 11 of the last 13 coaches to win a championship did it within their first 4 seasons. You're going to go into season 5 with Willie Green, and he's never won a playoff series. He's never finished higher than 8th in the Western Conference. Maybe Willie will be a better coach in the future, but right now he's no longer, in my opinion, the head coach for this time for the New Orleans Pelicans. And yet it appears that his personality and his relationships with the front office are more than enough to have him keep his job. It's the same thing the Pelicans did with Alvin Gentry. They liked Alvin. They liked the way he handled the Anthony Davis situation. Even though it was their fault, he had to handle it because they hamstrung Dell Demps and wouldn't put him in front of the media. We would have loved to talk to Dell. We weren't allowed to talk to Dell. No one ever gave us permission to talk to Dell. Dell was never around for us to talk to, and I don't think that was his choice. So we had to talk to Alvin Gentry. And Alvin's a veteran, so he knew how to handle us. He knew how to handle those questions. He's been through major trades and things like that before. But to give him another year of his job simply because he handled a bad situation off the court, well, as the season fell apart, no, that didn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense now that because Willie Green handled injuries as far as his external reaction to those things with maturity, he gets another job on the bench. He gets another season on the bench. He's already one of the lowest paid coaches in the NBA. So that kind of, to me, again, tells me that the Pelicans' commitment has nothing to do with putting the best product on the floor. Willie Green makes maybe $2 million a year. The going rate for coaches now is at minimum $7 million a year. You get what you pay for. You get what you pay for. And the Pelicans refuse to pay for anything. So while Willie Green's future may seem secure for him here, the Pelicans' future is not. The mistakes just keep getting made. And the Pelicans may be about to make another one as well. Because the other report that's coming out is that the other mandate that Joe Dumars will have is to trade Zion Williamson. Now, there are reports that Dumars has pushed back on that and said that he would like the opportunity to talk to Zion, to meet with him, and then try to get him back on track. But if the Pelicans are deciding that because of some off-court nonsense, this stuff with his, the mother of his child and this other woman that went on, that's the last straw, and that they need to move Zion Williamson for that, and this stuff is already out in public, you sandbagged your own position again. Who knows what the interest is on the market for Zion, but what kind of deal are you going to get in this market when you've already told people you're trying to get out of this? You get one first rounder and a couple of players that no one is going to care about. I think that this is just reactionary nonsense by the Pelicans. There are very few players who impact winning when they're on the floor as Zion Williamson does. Now, you give him passable teammates, and this is a 500 team at minimum. You give him really good ones, and you got a chance to at least get to the second round of the playoffs. Give him a great one, you might make one run, maybe two. The Pelicans have never built the type of team that would work for him, even when he was at his best. The internal conflict about Brandon Ingram and holding on to that. We talked about that on yesterday's program. But, if you've never really made it Zion Williamson's team and you had the opportunity and you have a contract that's really functional as far as trying to facilitate building a team around him now. You have some of the contract flexibility that you want with some expiring deals like CJ McCollum. And now that you've moved off the Brandon Ingram deal, you've moved off, Bruce Brown will be a free agent. That's $21 million off the books. So if I'm the Pelicans, I'd like to make one more shot. And I think, I know that there are fans who are frustrated and say it's time. It's time to move on from Zion. He's been a disappointment, all that. But I'm telling you, at the very least, if I'm the Pelicans, please wait until after the draft. After the draft lottery and find out what your position is. If you fall below 4 or 5, then you're really going to be desperate. And other teams are going to know that too. They already know if you're wanting to move Zion Williamson, I don't think you're going to get a good deal. If the Pelicans do trade Zion Williamson, who could be a potential partner? Who knows? Um, certainly there will be teams that are interested. There will be teams like um, the Grizzlies. There would be teams like the Rockets, maybe. But I think it would be really unlikely if the Pelicans would want to trade him into the Western Conference. So maybe you're talking about the Heat or the Hornets, sending him back to North Carolina, maybe pairing him with LaMelo Ball, the Brooklyn Nets. Maybe you get your center there. You go for Nick Claxton. Maybe you try to get, Cam Johnson or Cam Thomas, I guess. You're trying to get some scoring and things like that. But is there a great player out there that you could get for Zion Williamson? Or are you going to be dealing with other people's problems? Are you just exchanging a problem for a problem? And a problem is still a problem. Just because it's a different one, it's still a problem. If you end up with Julius Randle, are Pelicans fans going to be happy with Julius Randle? I don't think so. If you end up with Miles Bridges, you going to be happy with Miles Bridges? I don't think so. You know, I mean, how much faith? This really puts a burden on Trey Murphy, who'll be coming off of injury, to perform well right out of the gate, and a guy who's just starting to figure out what it's like to be a lead player in the league. I think that's a bad move. I think you're forcing the Pelicans into a bad start at next season without Zion Williamson, knowing that DeJounte Murray is injured, knowing that Herb Jones is injured, knowing that Trey Murphy is injured, knowing that CJ McCollum is getting towards the end of his tenure. What are you going to do here? What kind of organization are you really building? I think that's the ultimate question for the New Orleans Pelicans. What are you and what are you trying to be? That's the thread through all of this. Whether it's the hiring of Joe Dumars, whether it's the keeping or the firing of Willie Green, or whether it's trading Zion. Who are you and what do you want to be? The New Orleans Pelicans are floundering. They are failing. And it's not all on the players. This is an organization and an ownership group in disarray that does not know what it's doing. And somebody needs to put a stop to it, put their foot down, and let the basketball people do their jobs. Until that happens, the New Orleans Pelicans are going to be trapped in an endless cycle of mediocrity. I hate being that negative because I haven't really been that since we started this, and mostly through my writing career. I figured myself to be an honest person in my assessments. I try to be objective as possible. My thing is mostly on the basketball side. I never, try to put myself as somebody who breaks news because I don't do that. I don't have those kinds of relationships inside the building. I'm about the game. I love the sport of basketball, and I love talking about evaluating what's happening on the court. But with this organization, it feels like you deal so much with this off-court nonsense and the front office madness. So we'll see where this path takes them. But right now, you got to feel like this is a very, very bad process that ends up in a place where at best you'll be satisfied, not happy, not elated, satisfied. We shall see. Anyway, that'll be today's episode. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, drop your comments below. I'd love to hear from you. You can follow me on social media. I'm typically on Blue Sky, so you can find me at David Grubb on Blue Sky. And Instagram, I'm there as well. And don't forget to check out thebirdrights.com every day to see what we're up to and what information we may have for you. Till the next time, y'all take care of yourselves.